So this is the brand new Lenovo Yoga 9i, the 2022 model, and not only did it get a CPU update using the latest Intel 12th gen processors, the P series processors, but Lenovo actually made some really great design changes compared to the previous model. It's still 14 inches, but from a design standpoint, one of the things they changed was they went from a 16:9 display to 16:10, so you get that extra vertical space, which I know a lot of you prefer for productivity. But it's the other little things that are so much better. For example, I have the old Yoga right here, okay? And it looks like your traditional Ultrabook, but one of the things I did not like about it was the edges of the device. They just didn't feel refined or premium. They were very sharp. It's like they didn't put much thought into it. The new version, so much better. Like, look at this. They rounded out the edges. It feels really smooth. They polished it. It just looks and feels way better than before. You also get an extra port. So on the left-hand side, for example, you have your USB port, USB-A, two Thunderbolt 4 ports, and then on the right-hand side, you have an extra Type-C port. This is not Thunderbolt, it's just 3.2. Of course, your audio jack, and then your power button to turn the device on. The weight is very similar to the previous Yoga. It's slightly heavier because it is technically a bigger laptop, but you're not going to notice much of a difference if you're holding both in your hand. Just like the previous Yoga, it is a convertible. Of course, you can open it up with one hand. It flips all the way around, and one design thing that I truly like about this is the way the speaker system works. These are some of the best speakers, period, you can get on a Windows laptop. They have their 360 surround bar at the top here, which houses two tweeters. And then on the bottom of the laptop, there's two woofers. And the sound quality is superb. Like, it's not gonna beat on a MacBook Pro 16 in terms of sheer volume and bass and heaviness, but it's definitely better than a MacBook Pro 13. And I played some Netflix. I went to their Dolby Atmos movies to like get an idea of how it sounds, and it's actually really good. Like, I can feel the separation between left and right, and it kind of hits me in a way that no other speakers on a laptop do. Another big improvement is the touchpad. This is the old one, okay? The new one is 45% bigger. There's just so much more space to move your fingers around. It's very accurate. It's a good size. And they were able to do this because they were able to extend the depth of the newer model. The keyboard, the way it feels and types, is identical to the previous model, so there's not a lot of difference in terms of actuation, but they also changed the buttons around. On the previous model, if you wanted to switch between like performance and battery saving mode, you had to hit Function Q. That doesn't work anymore because they placed a separate key on the right-hand side to do this automatically. They also have like a screen privacy option, which I didn't get to work for some weird reason. There is a music option, which lets you switch between music and gaming and different sound profiles. You can switch to dark mode in Windows by simply tapping this button, and of course back into light mode. And instead of having the ugly fingerprint scanner over here, there's a more, I don't know, nicer looking button on the bottom right-hand side. But you don't have to use a fingerprint scanner because the new webcam, the 1080p webcam, which looks better than the previous version, also supports Windows Hello. But I really dig the display options. You can get two versions of OLED, 2880 by 1800 like I have here. There's a 4K version, which I don't suggest. Like, you really don't need 4K OLED on a 14-inch display. You're not gonna be able to tell the difference between this and that. And there's also a full HD version. I love OLED on a computer. It looks so good. These blacks are nice and deep. It gets about 400 nits of brightness, so it's bright enough, and the color accuracy is impeccable. And because this is a convertible and you can flip it into tablet mode, the display also happens to support touch. The only thing that I don't like is that it's a bit glossy, you know? Like, you can definitely see a lot of reflection if you have this by a strong light source, but that comes standard with any glass panel. As for performance, it is using the i7-1260p, which is Intel's P series of processors. So they're 28 watts, which can boost up to 64. So a little bit more demanding than the traditional 15-watt CPUs we're used to seeing from the U series. And look, it's a great machine, right? Like, it does get way better performance than last year's 11th gen Intel processors, but it's still not as good as AMD's U-series processors. It does have the advantage with single core clock speeds, so if you're doing anything that can utilize that, you will see the benefit using this compared to a lower wattage AMD processor. but I still think AMD has the advantage in the low end. If you're buying this for any sort of design work, it runs great. If you're using Adobe Photoshop, Adobe Premiere Pro, it's a little bit slower than I wanted. Puget Bench did reconfigure their plugin, so all the scores are now lower. It does beat out last year's model by a good amount, but it's not breaking any records. If you're using this to compile code, it did it in 34 to 36 minutes, which is not as good as what the AMD processors can do, but again, an improvement compared to last year's. And if you're buying this for gaming, don't, because it's using an integrated GPU. You can do it if you don't mind dropping the settings down a little bit, but at the end of the day, this is not a gaming laptop. As for heat management, the CPU never got over 70 degrees Celsius. It didn't thermal throttle, but of course it power limited in order to keep the CPU cool. Stayed around 28 watts. Keyboard deck was not much of a concern. It was a little higher than I'd like, but it's not gonna bother you if you're typing on it. It never felt super hot to the touch. As for fan noise, it generally stays pretty low. Unless you're doing a lot of stuff, the fans will kick on. It's never gonna be as quiet as a MacBook Pro M1 or MacBook Air M1, but the fans do kick on. And if you leave it in extreme performance mode, you'll find that the fans go up to about 44 to 45 decibels, but if you leave it in intelligent cooling or of course battery saving mode, it will stay below 40. As for the internals, not a lot has changed there. You still get a big fan and a small fan with 2 copper heat pipes that are pretty thick. RAM is soldered onto the motherboard, so you can't upgrade that. But you do have one storage drive that you can upgrade for something bigger. This one's only 512, but man, the read and write speeds on this guy are absolutely incredible. 75 watt-hour battery. And I was convinced that this laptop, because it's using a P series at 28 watts, wasn't gonna get the best battery life, but it was still able to pull through with over 8 hours of use. Now you can use rapid charging to top this thing up in just like 30 minutes and get most of your battery life back, but this should last you the entire day. So yeah, look, I like this. You know, this is a great convertible. They did a lot of things right in terms of the design. Obviously the 16:10 display is a lot nicer than 16:9. The battery life is still good, even though they're using a 28 watt processor, and all the small little updates from the touchpad to the extra keys are an improvement from last year. Obviously, if you have the previous model, this is not an upgrade for you, but if you're coming from an older convertible, I think this is one you should put on your short list. I will say this though about the P series processor, like this is the first one I've truly tested. It's definitely a nice upgrade from last year's version, but I think Intel's gonna have a tough time beating out the U series processor from AMD because those guys are just much more efficient and they're able to push out a bit more performance. Like this processor inside of here reminds me of the 4000 series multi-core speeds that AMD used to put out, but with much better single core clock speeds. Anyways, a little nerd speak, but for those of you that enjoy it, I hope this helps. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.